I'm going to push that now. I apologize for the interruption. Thank you, Lindsay. Bridget, I see your hand up, and then we'll go to Tom.
Thank you. I'm going to actually start my video for this. So my name is Bridget Ray. I'm Ojibwe Michif, but I am a guest here on Squaxin traditional territory in what was known as Stachess, which means where the black bears gather, because there was an abundance of fish here many years ago. Eelgrass is important to me personally and my community, my tribal canoe family, which is the Blue Heron Canoe, for several reasons. And one being that eelgrass shows the canoes the direction of the current and helps us navigate during our annual cultural event, our traditional marine lifeways that we're practicing. And I support that event every year as their green team lead organizer in our efforts to conserve water and recycle and compost and walk lightly on the earth. We have an obligation, at least within our culture, to practice placekeeping and take care of our plant relatives and waterways. And so there's a connection to our marine lifeways, and those teachings are passed on. That's the educational component, the side-by-side teachings with the aunties and the skippers and the elders, passing along not only stories that help us learn about life, but our function, our very important role in our environment to provide human ecological services, and to take care of the places we live and live in relationship as part of the whole system. And I think that the last thing I'll say is that challenge and opportunity is that the challenge and the opportunity is to engage impacted communities and encourage and support their leadership in not only this legislative process, but in the outreach and the hands-on practice of restoration when we get there. You know, the indigenous people from this area are sovereign nations, and there is you know, a whole nuance and well, I'm reaching for a better word, but diplomatic way to consult with tribes and to honor their sovereignty and the you know, the acknowledgement of marine lifeways and the history that's gone on before what's written in history books and has not been included in history books. So there's an element of social justice and environmental justice that I appreciate in the process that we're engaging in today. So I want to thank you for that. And that's all I have to say.
I apologize, I was muted. Bridget, thank you very much for that. And Tom, I see you have your hand up.
Just two quick things here. 2 points I think have kind of been made here, but I want to emphasize them. One is this sense of place. The Marine Resource Committee started off a lot of their sort of community-based social restoration work that they've done. They chose monitoring kelp beds because it gave them, it kind of rose to the top on what they valued in a sense of place. It was really interesting watching that happen. I didn't even do with it. That came out of the people that live in all these northern tier of counties in the Sailor Sea. The second thing is this educational component. I'm a little clever about this in the sense that I teach at Farty Harbor and teach undergraduates, and I use kelp as kind of the way to get at how ecosystems work and the touchstone with economics, touchstone with indigenous values and so forth. It is a tool that I use for connecting all these parts because I like kelp, but it's also, it works. It works in making all those connections for undergraduates.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to take one comment from Emily and then a comment from Ian, and then we'll move to that next question. So Emily and Ian, additional values, and then we'll go on to kind of that prioritization of which ones we think are important and why. So go ahead, Emily.
Thanks. I think I just wanted to echo, I think what was it Bridget, build upon what Bridget shared too about thinking who in these kinds of efforts, like values of inclusion, and thinking about kind of not only restoration of kelp and seagrass and the environment, but of relations and kind of more just relations and more inclusive. So I don't know where this goes, and I'm sorry if I'm like skipping around here and getting us off track, but I just want to reinforce how can we integrate into these values and the approach, engaging, perhaps human communities that have not been historically engaged in some of these more formalized state processes. I also just want to bring up the value of I don't know where this might go, but kind of thinking about foodways and just how kelp, I'm of East Asian descent. And so I grew up seaweed is very embedded in how I've moved through the world in terms of food and culture. And I know that's also a strong tradition in the Pacific Northwest. And so to me, I've also found that even though I'm in the Pacific Northwest and I'm born in the United States, I find comfort and connection and using or leaning into kelp and seaweed as a way to connect not only with my heritage, but as a reminder of our shared humanity and kind of cultural and food practices across the Pacific, whether it's Japan or Washington.
Thank you. I do want to make one comment around, we've heard a couple of folks mention engaging those impacted communities, social justice, environmental justice. There is an associated community engagement plan that was submitted to the legislature in December, specifically for the development of this health plan. I would encourage you to go look at that. The environmental justice is absolutely a value that is expressed in that plan. And if you are interested in talking to us offline around how we might do that more meaningfully, both either in this phase or in future phases, we'd love to have that conversation. So I just want to kind of plant that seed that is in a plan and that we are trying to figure out ways to do that in an authentic way. So Ian, I wanted to hand it back to you for this last question, number 1 comment.
Thank you. I guess just more broadly for putting on, this is really great. I'm with Environment America. We're just a national nonprofit that kind of works in the space. I think one thing that's kind of highlighted here in many ways, but not necessarily written down, is just an overall sense of wonder, a deep connectedness to nature and a deep appreciation for the environment. I think as humans, it's an innate thing within us all to kind of love and appreciate really awesome environments, and the more that we can do to foster that in advancing Washington's commitments to kelp and seagrass, the better.
Thank you. Okay, I see that we are using chat liberally. That is great. Hannah, anything you want to call out from the chat that you're seeing multiple places that you think we should address before we move to our next question?
Thanks. Yeah, most of it's been captured already. Foodways was on there multiple times, as was nature connection and sense of place. A couple additional ones are viewshed, play, and tribal treaty rights.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and keep moving. So Courtney, if you could scroll down to our second question. This next question is really around which ones you find to be most important and why. And it's really that why that we're trying to understand so that we can make sure that we are applying this value appropriately. So feel free to raise your hand or again, use the chat, but which one of these really resonates with you and why? I will say many of you have already done such a great job describing your value that I think we have a strong sense of place in foodways, why that's important. But if there's anything else you want to say. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think that community outreach especially is super important because I moved here to Seattle from North Central Arkansas about 3 years ago. And despite it being more like nature based, I still come across a lot of people who have no idea like what's actually going on in our local environment. And I think that it's important to be able to teach just regular people who may not, have access to a lot of information, or are not in like a college-based course, doing like environmental science programs or things like that. And I think just just opening up our doors into encouraging the education of others will help build a better program.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing a couple people agree with you, so we'll note that. Cindy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, tried to unmute myself. I made a mistake not acknowledging, first of all, that we're on the traditional hunting and fishing grounds and lands of the Coast Salish people out here in the San Juan Islands. And I do want to say that that education piece, there's a connection there to people, because the boaters come up here and they drop their anchors and tear up the eelgrass, and needing to, using the eelgrass maybe as that anchor to educate people about how integrated the ecosystems are up here and how important it is to treat it with care.
Great, thank you. Other values that you really want to highlight and explain why it's important, or you want to share more information about? Lynn. Are you figuring out mute? I can see you getting closer to your.
It doesn't want to do it. There I
There you
have
go.
it. Sorry, slow machines today. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to say this right, but it's a little bit of what a couple people said. I think Ian said it really nicely too, is that and Tom, the sense of place and nature, there's a real connection to knowing and being familiar, I guess family memories as well, but having kelp canopy areas that you're used to kayaking through, it's always there. You go by and see it. It's comforting to know that nature is healthy and that things in this crazy world that change every day, that there's this sense of calm in nature that you can go back to, and it just connects you right to our Mother Earth, that kind of thing. I don't know if those are the right words or not, but it's sort of a combination of sense of place and nature together.
Great, thank you. I might say this wrong. Is it Sego, Jackson?
Yeah, it's Sego, thanks. Yeah, so there's a lot of different words to apply to what we were just talking about, but it's also the ability to be in nature. So appreciate nature, be in nature. Like, it's part of our family lore, doing low tide walks and wading through the eelgrass. That's really important to our daughter, who's 35 now. But, I've only been here since the 70s. So imagine people that have been here for generations. So I have a hard time putting words to it because it is so precious to me. So it's spiritual, it's exploration. I would never call it recreation. It's a whole nature appreciation, life appreciation experience that happens at the low tides in the eelgrass.
Thank you. Lillian.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. So people have said this have emphasized the sense of place and the sense of wonder. And I just want to add another dimension to that, which is that I think these connections to these shallow species and these nearshore coastal ecosystems, I think can give us an opening and understanding to connecting with the broader ocean ecosystem, the broader marine environment, which is very unknowable to many people, especially, if you're not working on the ocean as a career, for example, or otherwise, deeply involved in sort of ocean work. It can be a kind of unknown space. And I think I just wanted to add that as another dimension to this kind of connectivity and this being in relationship to place, I think having this really strong connection to those nearshore places can give us that deeper connection to this incredible ecosystem that's the majority of our planet and so important in all these things. So
thank you, Lillian. Peter, let's go to you.
Hi, I'm Peter Stielquist. I am the Washington Policy Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. I thought this was a good place to kind of interject some of the recreational values that our people that we represent really hold for kelp beds and the nearshore. It can provide a really safe and wonderful place to spend time on a paddleboard or surfboard or kayak. And I think that that's really important to highlight, as well as some of the safety features of if it's windy out, a kelp bed can be a safe place out of the wind for people to still get to be out there and be away from dangerous conditions.
Great, thank you, Peter. Before we move to the last question, Hannah, anything in the chat that you'd like to kind of call out that seems to be resonating with people?
Yes, a lot of echoes to sense of place and connectedness to nature, a lot of echoes on the outreach and education side. And a couple that didn't get brought up verbally were mental health benefits and cross-generational connectivity.
Great, thank you. Before we go to Peter, so we are at the 20 minutes, which means that if you are interested in participating in discussions on either the economic or the ecological values, now would be a great time to rotate. And I think we might start to see some people pop in here very shortly. What I'm going to do is continue moving to question 3, and then we will cycle back up to question 1 once we start to see people rotate in and out. But I want to give folks who are still here today who want a chance to address question 3 just a couple of minutes. So that question 3 is really, what challenges or concerns should be considered as it relates to social cultural values? And when we think about challenges, we're trying to use these values to inform our prioritizing framework and make some decisions around locations and tools that we can use to conserve and restore. So just really being aware of, what are those concerns or challenges so that we can face them. Any concerns or big looming questions you might even have around how would you integrate something like this? A question I have is, how do you capture sense of place when it's clearly such a strong value? What does that look like, and what becomes maybe a dry prioritization framework? Any thoughts on question 3? Okay, I see from Megan, differing values. Okay. Cindy, and then I think we've got some comments coming in through the chat. So let's go to Cindy with your hand up.
Yeah, I would say we need to look at the impact of tourism and how that impacts tribal and treaty rights, and also the ability of the people and animals, and basically how can you strike a balance between people who want to come and visit and needing to live in an unharassed manner.
Great, thank you, Cindy. I see in the chat, Caitlin says, one concern that comes to mind is the prioritization of ecological restoration and conservation, while human well-being, tribal treaty and sovereign rights, cultural connectedness fall to the wayside or are considered as afterthoughts. Absolutely. I see conflicting values, needs, resources, and uses. Other thoughts on these challenges or concerns that you have? Okay, before I encourage everyone to find a different breakout room to contribute to, are there any last thoughts, questions, or takeaways either with one of the questions we presented or just general comments you have around social cultural values that you think we need to make sure that we're capturing? Emily.
I just wanted to comment that for question 2, I didn't respond because I found that really hard to kind of figure out, because values are so interconnected. I found this really challenging. So I don't know if maybe if there might be others who experience that well, but that's why I didn't really participate in that one, because it was just too complex and hard to articulate these very interconnected, deep kind of things. So that just something to consider as y'all review responses.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's why we need so much help, Emily. These are complex topics that really warrant some deep dives. So we have a couple of comments in the chat coming through. Impact of increasing urban viewpoint. Zover with the economy, healthy water increases availability of traditional and cultural foods and reduces healthcare costs caused by poor diet and or lack of access to clean marine activity areas. Okay, any last comments? Otherwise, I will encourage those who are interested to transition to another breakout room, and we will move back to the first question. And I might set some framing language. So I think we've had a few people join us since the last round. So just as a reminder, we are in the social and cultural room. And Courtney, if you could scroll back up to the top of our mural. When we say social and cultural, we are really looking at those non-material benefits that bring, that provide value to people's lives. So we're looking at cultural values, spiritual values, outdoor recreation and access, perhaps fish habitat for recreational fisheries or kayaking. And for those who are just joining, we've had quite a bit of discussion around that, these additional values that include foodways, sense of place, artistic inspiration. There's a lot of connection spiritually from a variety of different perspectives, really at recognizing the role of environmental justice and social justice and the strong connection of kelp and eelgrass to those issues. And trying to understand how we might capture that just innate sense of gratitude or grief when we see it disappear. So that's what we've talked about so far, and we would love to hear from you who have joined us. What values that we've just mentioned resonate with you, or what additional values would you like to add to this discussion? So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like, or we are also using our chat very liberally today. Any values that you think are missing that you would like us to add to our list? Rhoda.
Hi, as a scuba diver, the underwater experience is really strong. And usually up in the San Juans or out on the coast, you have a lot more variety of seaweeds and stuff. That's a great deal lost here in the Puget Sound a great deal. So having so much more of that would make a huge difference. So the central Puget Sound specifically is a little bit low in the diversity, but all the way, that's where the majority of the people are at the same time. So you have to go down to like Tacoma Narrows to experience that, you know, so it's a really fantastic thing to have a lot more diversity as divers underneath the water to experience that. The submersion technique.
Excellent. Thank you. Great addition, Rhoda. All Are there others who would like to identify and voice a value they think are missing still on this mural board? I see someone wants to add snorkeling in addition to scuba diving.
Is it all right if I speak?
Yes, go for it, please.
So with the eelgrass, they're kind of near where I live. I live in Kitsap County. There's been eelgrass restoration projects that go on. And so there's like a research boat that goes out and replants eelgrass that's been damaged or that has kind of like, not like been growing where it has been historically growing. And it's kind of interesting to see people, they get like little, it's like a planter pot like you would get at the store to plant flowers in your garden or something. And they have like a whole bunch of them and they just plant them individually, like one at a time. Scuba divers do. And so it's really cool to see all the training and education and things like which are, values here that goes into, this care for something so specific and how that builds into this care for the ecosystem, but also just that personal connection that each diver has, with each individual plant. And like they take it down there and they put it down there and like a little bit, help bring back that ecosystem when it starts to kind of not be as healthy as it was before. And then by doing that, they can actually kind of tell like, oh, well, maybe we should change the regulations about, what goes in the water or this or that or whatever kinds of things. It just is like this personal connection that shows the interconnectedness of all of the living things in this region that depend on each other by being in the same watershed, by living near one another. And I think that's really fascinating to see, but also like really special. And so that's just that personal caretaking aspect of it. Or that restoration, the restorative nature of as humans, sometimes we do harm the environment, and then that putting it back, I think is also a really special value.
Thank you. And I think someone captured it well when they mentioned in the chat, generators of wonder and curiosity. I think we're hearing that across the board. Others who would like to add to this list that we've started to generate on social and cultural values that are provided by Kelp and Eelgrass. Ryan.
Yeah, I'd like to put a star next to tribal treaty rights in your lower left hand.
Okay.
And I'd like to say that there's also tribal trust responsibility, which is the federal government acting as an effective partner to make sure that tribal treaty rights are maintained and delivered. So for me, the vitality of these ecosystems and the prey base and primary production they provide is really important to maintaining tribal trust responsibilities and those treaty rights. Maybe 3 more stars. That's how strong I feel about it. Thank you.
You're here. Any other values that you think are missing that we need to capture on our mural board? Josh.
Hi. I was trying to phrase this in a way so that value is at the end of the phrase. Maybe an intergenerational responsibility. Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. Hannah, I see the chat is going and I've lost track. Is there anything that stands out you think we should carry forward onto our mural board?
There have been lots of echoes on the diving. And another new one I'll give Courtney a chance to catch up. Another new one was combat climate change hopelessness.
Ooh. I like it. I think we have the best room so far. So let's go ahead and feel free to continue if you need to add some additional values in the chat, but let's go ahead and scroll down to our second question. So for those who are new to our room, the second question is, what social cultural values are most important to you and your community, and why? And I think it's that why we're really looking to understand. And I know that it is often in our description, but if there's anything else you want to articulate around the why should this value be elevated and made available in our prioritization framework? We have a few that were already there. It is difficult to disentangle the first and second one. So, okay, well, we can actually move to question. Oh, Ryan, go for it.
Yep, I'm going to repeat my talking point. So honoring tribal treaty rights and making sure our communities deliver on maintaining tribal treaty rights going forward.
Okay, great. All right, we can move back and forth if we need to, but let's go ahead and go down to the third question, which we actually didn't spend very much time on in the first round. And so this third question is, what challenges or concerns should be considered as it relates to these social cultural values? So that's either more broadly, just what are your concerns with the social cultural bucket? Or if there are specific values that you see some real challenges with as far as how do we integrate or implement that value in our prioritization framework. And Ryan, is that an old hand? Okay. What challenges do you see or concerns that you have around these different values we've identified? Okay, so in the chat, I see from Melissa, sociocultural values are often deprioritized related to economic values. Yeah. It's hard to quantify sometimes. I see Stena and then Bree.
Hi there, Stina here.
Stina.
No worries. I trying to figure out how to phrase this exactly, but I remember going to a conference and learning about how like the health standards set for like the safeness to eat things like salmon are like a very maybe like dominant culture norm versus like more subsistence. Like if you're eating salmon at a subsistence rate, like those levels would need to be a lot higher, or like your water quality basically needs to be better if you're eating more of it. And I'm not entirely sure how that relates to kelp, but I know kelp is something that is a subsistence food for many cultures. So kind of like that health concern, and like how are we setting those thresholds of like safe eating levels, if that's a problem.
So how are we protecting public health perhaps through our, okay.
A beautiful summary, thank you.
Bree, let's go to you next.
Hi. Yeah, I think communication is going to be pretty critical with the public, and I'm sure everybody's aware of that, but really trying to make an emotional connection between the public and eelgrass and kelp. A lot of folks know about, you know, kelp forests and have a strong affinity for that, but I think eelgrass is really underplayed publicly and really tapping into social media, and I'm sure everyone's, you know, got that on their mind.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Kelp is getting a lot of attention, but we need to remember that eelgrass is a part of this plan as well, and that it has a lot of its values that we're you know, utilizing. So are there other challenges or concerns you have associated with either the bucket itself or a specific value that you've seen on this mural board? Let's go Josh and then Ryan.
Hey, I guess from a systems perspective, you know, there's only so much space in the system, and not all of the values are going to be able to be equally represented. I think there's going to have to be not just balancing, but I think there's, you know, certainly there's going to be losers and winners, you know, in the ecosystem. And I think that will rebound into the culture too. There's going to be losers and winners there, and that's going to be difficult to accept.
A clarifying question. So is the concern really that perhaps these social and cultural values won't make the cut? Or can you kind of explain what that trade-off looks like for you?
You know, I guess people are going to have to, I think that there's kind of, in restoration, there's a need, there's some ecologists have the value of austerity, which is not a very that doesn't sound like a value. It's not something that people like to think about, but it's something that ecologists think about a lot in terms of being able to support a planet of people and animals. So that's a challenging value, I guess. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I want to go to Ryan, and I also just want to mention that if you are hoping to hit all 3 breakout rooms, this might be a good time for you to rotate, but you are also welcome to continue in this conversation as well. But for sake of time, just a heads up that we are starting to run into that 3rd breakout frame. So Ryan, let's go to you next.
Great. Josh said something about enough space for all these values. I'm thinking about space as well. So, you know, not in my backyard is a shorthand way of saying people feel strongly that they don't want to see the loss of ecological functions in their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
But also people want to see the conservation brought to their neighborhood. And so as you decide, how do you prioritize which of these vital aquatic lands should be prioritized for conservation, you're going to have to cope with that dynamic. People want the conservation brought to their neighborhood, and people really lament when we sign off their area and say we're going to have to forfeit the function there. So, and that is also a tribal comment. Usual and accustomed areas are part of that dynamic, but it is much more broadly a community concern about that, having the conservation be in their neighborhood.
Thank you. Other questions, challenges, concerns you have with the social cultural values, either as a whole, a bucket, or individually? And Hannah, is there anything in the chat you'd like to call out?
Yeah, we've got a few to catch up on from the chat here. That I will try to be concise describing. A couple mentions of lack of support and funding. A mention of, I liked how they phrased this, loving it to death and trampling. And a couple mentions of the fact that there is a social and cultural value in livelihoods that rely on these habitats, which can conflict with strict preservation.
Okay, thank you. I do see one question that I will touch on. I am not 100% qualified, so this will be a question we will go to Max and Cynthia with in the meeting summary, but it is really the question around, how are we going to communicate these issues to the portion of the population that has little or no interest in attending meetings such as this? So as I mentioned in the earlier breakout room, there is a communication and engagement plan that is associated with the development of the health plan. That was a plan that was submitted to the legislature and is available on the website. And that is a high-level strategy for engaging different groups and promoting awareness around this plan. But I think the bigger question is, how do we engage kind of the disinterested public? And that is something that I think we will rely on recovery partners, and it's a big question and a big challenge that we're going to have to address as we develop this framework and then try to implement this framework. So I do want to point people toward that community engagement plan because we have kind of the foundation set and we'd love feedback on that. Hal, I see your hand.
Okay, I'm just educating the public, because I think a lot of people don't realize the importance.
Yep. So I think we might have had a few people transition. If you haven't and you want to try to tag one last breakout room, now would be a great time to rotate. Courtney, let's go ahead and scroll back up to that first question. So for those of you who have joined just very recently, this is the social and cultural values breakout room, and we are looking at those non-material benefits that we value. So for example, spiritual value, recreational values, fisheries, kayaking, scuba diving. We've spent a lot of time talking about the incredible sense of place that Kelp and Eelgrass provide, that spiritual connection that we have, and how it kind of it creates that sense of intergenerational community and connection to nature. We've talked about foodways. We recognize that there's an incredible importance to tribal treaty rights and to the spiritual value to tribes. So really highlighting that, you'll see that there are some stars there for that. We'd love to know what we're missing. What are some of those social cultural values that we haven't identified on this mural board that you think we need to include and consider? So feel free to use your raised hand, or we have been using our chat very liberally, and that will again be a part of our record. Or if you have any questions about what's on the board and you're new to the room, feel free to ask those as well. Anything you'd like to put a star next to? Betsy.
Hi, I just jumped in. I would love to see the rest of the board. And then I'm also curious, has just the aesthetic value of particularly, has that been added to this? Because I just find kelp beds incredibly beautiful.
Absolutely. Aesthetic value, it is added. We can actually do a quick scroll. So Courtney, if you want to scroll down, and we recognize question 2 is a little challenging to disentangle from question 1. So you might see some repetition there, but the question is, why are these values important to you? So what are the most important ones and why? And then that third question is, what challenges or concerns should be considered as it relates to the social cultural values, either as a category or individually?
I think some of the concerns and challenges, especially like when they kind of interplay with the ecological and economic, is that, there's things that we want to do, but it's difficult to kind of find a way to do them in a way that makes sense, and that actually achieves what we're trying to do. Like here in Kitsap County, we've been trying to, we got a federal grant to build some bike lanes and also to repair a stream so that it's actually like the salmon can swim back up it, which is fantastic. But then kind of looking at what does that look like to kind of take a look at the stream so that, you know, it's not being blocked by like a culvert, and so the salmon can swim back up it, and that kind of thing. Like kind of talking again about like the eelgrass and people going and like replanting the little plants like one at a time. It's actually like a really complicated thing to like take a stream that's been changed by construction and to put it back into a condition, you know, where salmon can swim. And so it's like, well, our values and our desire and our intention, even sometimes financially, we're like, okay, we're set, we're going forward. But then it's like, well, what is, you know, like, what are the physical attributes of it? Are those construction materials possible to get right now? What does the weather look like at this time of year, you know, when we're trying to be building? And so it's like, sometimes it's not even that our values aren't in alignment or anything. Maybe all of the values are in alignment. But it's like taking longer, like just the nature of time itself is taking longer than we'd like. And that can be frustrating to people who aren't involved in the actual process of it, because they would like, they have, you know, values as well. You know, they would like to be able to have that outdoor recreational access, just the spiritual value of like the salmon returning, those types of things. And that gets jammed up against like the time process. Or even things like home and property values, which at the end stage might actually increase because, you know, of how nice the area is now. But in the interim time of when they're maybe you're like repairing a bridge or something, you're not seeing that value. And if someone's only value is that, or if that's the only part of the process that they're having any interaction with, they're probably going to be frustrated for a little while. And I think it's probably that way with a lot of these. Like if you just take a little piece of it, like the fisheries, for example, or, you know, a lot of the recreational uses, if that's the only encounter that someone has with kelp and eelgrass, and not, you know, thinking of some of these other things like water quality, how helpful it is for not just climate change mitigation, but also like kelp and seagrasses of all kinds. They produce like 20% of the world's oxygen. So it's not like every time we're taking a breath in and out, we're thinking like, thanks, kelp. But it's something that's there and kind of is omnipresent in its effect on our lives. But a lot of times we only think of it when it's like, oh, I should go fishing with my friends, or well, that's, you know, I'm looking for houses on Zillow, and that can make the housing rates change. And so I think it's when we look at it in that way, we can actually see how in line all these values can be. But it's when we just take one value at a time that it can seem like they're so at odds with one another.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. It's really hard to sometimes see the bigger picture. Evan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share before we run out of time here, and kind of going off of what she was just talking about with bull kelp and eelgrass meadows, is that when I work at Limekiln Point State Park, by the way, and so I answer, what is that on top of the water, probably every day. People don't know what bull kelp is, and that is surprising to a lot of people to learn when they come to the park. And so that is a gateway for me to talk about other different types of marine forests. And so I think that's also an opportunity, like what people have written on here already about, you know, just like educating people is might be this like underrepresented thing, but I think it's like something that we have to keep, you know, pushing forward. So that's all.
Great, thank you. I was given the 5-minute warning, and I'm not even quite sure when that came in. So I think we are very short on time. So I want to open it up for any last questions or comments around any of the questions, or any general comments you'd like to make around social cultural values. And Hannah, I want to also give you an opportunity to voice anything that you've seen in the chat come through.
I think the only thing I've seen in the chat that didn't make it on yet was the need to reduce water pollution.
Okay.
is likely to be a challenge.
Okay, great. Any last questions or comments? Okay, I might have, just as the final wrap up, Courtney, if you could scroll up to that very first bucket, and we can leave that up there for folks who want to just kind of look at what we've created so far as a group. If you want to read the chat, we are again saving the chat and incorporating it into our meeting summary. So all of that feedback is just as valid as what we have on the mural. We appreciate everyone's participation in this discussion. I think it has been very fruitful, and let us know if you have any questions. We'll hang out until they call us back to the main room. And if you have any last thoughts, feel free to jump in.